While the blood pressure cuff gnawed at my arm, my daughter said, "I sold your beach house," and hung up so cleanly it felt like she'd cut my throat with a dial tone. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and dragged umbrellas. A TV muttered the news without sound. I sat in a green plastic chair that pinched the backs of my thighs, listening to the coughs and sighs of strangers. When the tinny ring of my phone made the nurse glance up, "Mom, we're going to Europe tomorrow," Angela said. Her voice polished smooth like a stone you skip across a lake. "I already sold your beach house and your car. We needed the money." Bye. A click. An absence. 45 years collapsed into a rectangle of silence in my hand. I did not cry. A strange calm folded around me. Fog around a stubborn lighthouse. My name is Antonia Brooks. I am 71 years old, and until that moment I thought I knew my daughter. 6 months earlier, my husband Robert had died in the middle of our ordinary. He kissed my forehead, said, "Good morning, my love," and lifted his coffee. Then his hand lost the cup and his body went quiet against the table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 4.5 decades. People call it a heart attack. I call it a thunderclap that split my house down to the studs. After the funeral, routines turned into rooms. I wandered through like a sleepwalker. Angela arrived with lilies that smelled like funerals and gentle commands. She came 3 times a week, drove me to the grocery store, perched on the edge of my bed and told me to see a doctor for a general checkup. "You need to take better care of yourself now that you're alone," she said, smiling a smile I chose to read as kindness because I needed to believe it was. If love is a tone you learn to trust, convenience is its perfect mimic. The beach house she sold without a flinch had been our sanctuary. We bought it when Angela was 15, by saying no to smaller pleasures. No to vacations with frilly brochures. No to granite countertops. No to new clothes we didn't need, so we could say yes to that one place where the porch faces the ocean's hinge. The truck, Robert's old Ford, was more than an engine. It was the smell of his cologne on the seatbelt, oil changes done on Sunday afternoons, and the way he always parked beneath the same tree, as if the spot itself were holy. Angela knew what those things meant, which made the swing of her axe cleaner and faster. The nurse called my name. I tucked the phone away like a hot coal, let a cuff bite my arm, and did not tell the doctor that my world had just been auctioned like yard sale clutter. He said I was fine for my age. Rest more, eat better, be gentle with myself. I nodded and promised, and tucked my hands into my coat pockets, but my palms were already itching for a manila envelope I hadn't thought about in months. 3 days before he died, Robert pressed that envelope into my hands. "Antonia, put this in your dresser drawer. If something happens to me, open it when you feel ready. Grief is a loud room. You can misplace anything in it, even a secret left in plain sight." The bus home rattled like every bus I've ever taken. Teenagers slept with mouths open. A man in a bright jacket hummed to himself and stared at the scratched window. I sat by the aisle and counted breaths like a woman preparing for a deep dive. If my daughter had stripped me down to skin and bone with a phone call, then somewhere, somehow, my husband had wrapped me in armor without telling me. I unlocked the front door of the house that still smelled a little like him, walked straight to our bedroom, slid open the dresser drawer, and found the envelope exactly where I'd left it. My name was on the front in Robert's tidy hand. I sat on our bed and opened it like a birthday gift you both want and dread. What spilled into my lap was a different marriage, a parallel structure my carpenter husband had built the way a man builds hidden shelves no one sees until he's gone. There were deeds and bank certificates and a letter 3 neat pages in his familiar script. He told me he had invested our savings over the years. We did not only own the beach house, we had 6 other properties, including the apartment building where Angela and her husband lived, and shares in 3 steady companies. He'd put everything under a quiet company, with a name that meant nothing, until it suddenly meant everything. "You are rich, my love," he wrote. "You always were. I hid this not to deceive you, but to keep us loved for who we are, not what we have, especially by our daughter." I let the papers fall in a small drift across the bedspread. My bus driver husband of 40 years had tucked away acorns in a forest I never saw. His careful plans formed lines I traced with a fingertip, past tenants' names and dividend dates, past the building where my daughter slept, past the beach house that had been sold as if it could be traded for a plane ticket. He had held back what could twist love, not to starve me but to feed us a different meal. I touched a photograph on the dresser Angela at 5 lopsided braids and a grin in Robert's lap and wondered where that small girl had gone. In the morning, Angela called again. The way a person calls a bank to confirm their deposit. "We already transferred the money from the house and the truck," she said. Efficient and bright. "We deposited your share into your account. It's not much, but it'll help you live for a few months while you look for something smaller." "My share?" I asked. "We gave you 30%. That's fair, right? Edward has an incredible business opportunity in Europe. We leave this afternoon. We'll be gone at least 6 months." "Safe travels," I said. Her relief was almost a sound. "I knew you'd understand. You're always so compassionate. We love you." She hung up. I stood with my palm on the cool laminate counter and laughed for the first time since Robert died. An honest, startled laugh. A laugh with disbelief on one end and relief on the other. 30% of what was already mine. Generosity as a costume over greed. It would have been unbearable if it hadn't been so absurd. I checked my bank account. A deposit glowed on the screen. Generous to anyone who didn't know the true numbers. They'd sold the house at a panic price, the truck for pennies. Urgency bleeding value the way a slow leak bleeds air from a tire. That afternoon, I watched from the window as they left. 2 suitcases. An expensive carry-on. A kiss I'd seen 1,000 times and never trusted. They didn't look up. They didn't wave. When the cab turned the corner, I laid Robert's documents on the table and dialed Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who had shaken my hand at the funeral. "I found some papers I don't understand," I said. "I'd like to come in." His office had marble floors that made me feel small and solid at once. He read fast, then slow, then looked at me. "Mrs. Brooks, this is far more than I imagined," he said. I told him what I wanted. The beach house back, through the legality it never lost. Formal control of the properties, especially the building where Angela lived. Discretion, no lawsuits against my daughter. No spectacle. "You want to keep this a secret?" he asked. "For now," I said. Some lessons need a still room. Weeks passed like 2 films projected on opposite walls. In public, I played the poor widow abandoned by an ungrateful child, receiving the butcher's pity and accepting Aurora next door's soup. In private, I studied deeds and statements, learned the pace of asset transfers, set my phone to vibrate for Mr. Peterson's updates. One Wednesday morning, he said the beach house sale had been nullified. The buyers were innocent and refunded. The house was mine again. Control of the apartment building would take 2 more weeks. I took the bus to the coast and sat across the street from our cream-painted sanctuary with porch rails like simple hymns. I felt our summers expand inside me, the grilled fish, the sand in Angela's hair, the men who came with her, and left with our laundry folded neatly by beds they'd never make. An older man stepped out to water a plant and asked if I was all right. "I knew the former owners," I said. He told me they'd been told a sick elderly woman had to sell quickly, a daughter managing things because the mother couldn't. My daughter had turned me into a story that would sell a house. That night, I called Mr. Peterson. "I want Robert's truck back too," I said. He warned it would be complicated. In the fog after the funeral, I had signed a power of attorney Angela placed before me, the lines of my name sliding like boats across a harbor I barely saw. "Do what you can," I said. He did. 2 weeks later, he told me the man who bought the truck was an acquaintance. For a modest compensation and the reassurance that no trouble would follow, he'd return it. Mr. Peterson told me something else. Edward had borrowed money using the apartment as collateral, and the banks were beginning to notice he wasn't the owner. A seed of decision took root. "Send an eviction notice," I said quietly. He hesitated. "To my daughter?" "She evicted me with a phone call," I said. "I will send a letter. 30 days, as the law prescribes." He agreed. And that same day, Aurora arrived with gossip that tasted like confirmation. Edward had debts he'd hidden. The European opportunity was thin air. Angela would be back soon. I sat on the porch with cooling tea and spoke to the stars. Because Robert once told me the brightest were the souls of people who'd lived well. "Thank you," I whispered. "You always did love a long game." Angela returned alone, just as predicted. A day later, the eviction letter was in her hands. At 8 the next morning, my phone rang. "Mom," she said, voice shaking. "I got a letter saying I have to leave my apartment in 30 days. It's from a company called Robert Investments, Incorporated." That can't be right, can it? His name on a corporate letterhead felt like a blessing pronounced out loud. "I don't know that company," I said softly. "Are you sure it's legitimate?" She swallowed the way a person gulps air after surfacing too fast. "Edward left me in Europe," she confessed. "He ran off with a hotel waitress. There never was a business deal. I came back to this." She asked if she could come over. "I don't have anyone else," she said, and the words mirrored my weeks of silence. "Of course," I replied. She looked smaller when she stood in my doorway, like grief had ironed her into a thinner version of herself. At the kitchen table, the one where I'd learned how to be two women at once, she cried real tears. She told me about debts I already knew, about signatures forged in her name, about banks knocking at a door that couldn't open. "Can I stay here a little while? Just until," she began, setting down the fragile dish of hope. "This will always be your home," I said. And it was the truth, even if our home had been eclipsed by mistakes. She left to pack a suitcase, and I called Mr. Peterson. "I want a full accounting of Edward's debts," I said. "I want my daughter separated from him, legally and entirely." Quietly, he promised to begin. The next morning, Angela moved back into her old room, humiliation tucked into drawers like winter sweaters. She carried in a small manila envelope with my name on it in Robert's hand. "It was among Edward's things," she said. "Maybe he found it after Dad died and forgot to give it to you." Inside was a short letter and a tiny key to a safety deposit box. "If our daughter is in trouble," Robert had written, "this will help you help her. Use it wisely." For the first time in weeks, I lied to Angela about something that was itself a truth. "I had no idea," I said, and we took the bus to the bank. The box held jewelry pieces I recognized from Robert's family, and pieces I had never seen: emeralds, pearls, rings that looked like promises made in a language older than money. There was a note listing approximate values. "We could sell some," Angela said, breath catching as light melted along a necklace. "You could get your beach house back, and I could pay off some of Edward's debts." "Are you sure you want to use your father's inheritance to pay for what he did?" I asked. "What other choice do I have?" she whispered. We brought the pieces home and spread them on the table the way we used to spread school projects and Christmas recipes. She sold most of it, keeping only my engagement ring and her grandmother's small necklace, and learned how to bargain with men who wore loops and opinions like uniforms. The money covered the worst of the debts clawing at the door. It could not cover the theft of her dignity, but I had already made payments on that account in a different currency. At night, she cried quietly. In the mornings, she looked for work. Her credit was a lead weight she had to drag through every interview. 2 turned her away because of pending legal issues. A third offered nights cleaning offices. She took it. The first night she came home with sore feet and a story about Mrs. Johnson, 60 years old, who had been cleaning for 2 decades after her husband left her with small children. "She said there are 2 kinds of people in this job," Angela told me, as she took off her shoes. "People who never had opportunities, and people who ruined the ones they had." She asked me which I was. "What did you say?" I asked. "The truth," she said, and went to run a bath for her aching legs. Mr. Peterson called with the numbers. Edward owed more than $200,000. Worse, there was evidence of deliberate fraud documents he had forged to run overseas. "If we can prove it," he said, "we can free Angela from responsibility. It will cost time and money." "Take both," I replied, because I had them. "Don't tell her yet." A week later, he called again. They'd found Edward in Paris, caught in a scheme to marry for residency. There was written proof he'd falsified Angela's signature. The legal path to unhook her from his anchors was clear. "Begin," I said. "We'll tell her when the ink is dry." I watched Angela change in increments small enough to miss, unless you were tracing them with a mother's fingertip. She came home with tips on how to scrub smarter instead of harder. She learned to make soup from bones and beans, to stretch a dollar until it carried dignity. She apologized without a hunt for excuses, and listened like someone who needed to stay. She began to say thank you as if the words were a porch light she was determined to keep lit. I kept the secret, and the secret kept me brave. Aurora stopped by with tea, and the kind of questions old friends are allowed to ask. "You're letting her suffer," she said softly. "You could fix it." "Sometimes love is a splint," I said. "Sometimes it's a surgeon's knife." Aurora nodded. "Make sure it's not revenge. You're calling a lesson," she warned. I carried her caution like a coin in my pocket and weighed it each day. 3 weeks after the night of sour-smelling hallways and mop handles, Mr. Peterson called with a tone that made my skin prickle. "We're done," he said. "The debts are severed. The fraudulent loans are void. The eviction is a formality we can withdraw. Edward has been arrested in France for marriage fraud and will likely be deported." I told Angela only that I'd made an appointment with a lawyer who might help. She balked at the word fees until I said we were only going to listen. She put on her best clothes despite having nowhere to impress. And we took the bus downtown like two pilgrims visiting a temple that issues verdicts instead of sermons. Mr. Peterson greeted us and placed a folder in front of her. She read. Confusion pinched her face, then relief unwound it in careful lines. Then a softer shame that came without drama. "This says I'm not responsible for Edward's debts," she said. "It says he forged my signature. That the loans are void." "Yes," Mr. Peterson said. "We have evidence." "But who, how?" she stammered. He glanced at me. It was time to let truth take a chair. "Your father left more than I knew," I said. "A company, properties, savings. I learned about it after he died. And then I learned again after you called me from the doctor's office. I've been working with Mr. Peterson to fix what could be fixed." Her eyes moved to the second folder he slid across the desk. The deeds, the shares, the statements, the quiet empire Robert built while driving a bus and carrying our groceries in one hand. She scanned the building where she had lived. The beach house, the modest motel on the coast, the steady tide of dividends. "You knew all this when I came back with nothing?" she asked. "Yes." "You watched me cry and sell jewelry and mop floors?" "Yes." "Why?" The word didn't sharpen like a knife. It trembled like a bridge that might hold. "Because some truths can't be handed over like a check," I said. "They have to be earned. You needed to learn the value of what you treated like trash: family, respect, responsibility. You threw me away with a phone call. I needed you to feel, for a little while, what you made of me." She cried then, but not the thin, wet tears of panic I'd watched for weeks. These were heavier, saltier, as if the tide were pulling something broken back into shape. "I treated you like garbage," she whispered. "I abandoned you when you were most alone. I forgave you before you asked," I said. "But this was never only about forgiveness. It was about growing you back up." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat, as if to remind us that the world keeps its own time. "Your legal matters are resolved," he said to Angela. "Your mother has recovered the house and truck. The eviction will be withdrawn if she wishes. Angela turned to me. "You evicted me," she said, half marvel, half ache. "I gave you 30 days to understand what 30 seconds on a phone did to me," I replied. We walked home quieter and lighter. The days that followed didn't glitter. They settled. Angela kept her job even though she could quit. "I need to finish what I started," she said. She began night classes, a certificate that opened into credits for a degree in social work. "I want to help other women who find themselves where I did," she explained. "I want to make meaning out of my mess." She budgeted, not because she had to, but because it showed her where her life lived. She moved through our house differently, wiping the table without being asked, telling me when she'd be late, cooking dinner and leaving the kitchen cleaner than she found it. Her tone softened, then strengthened. Softness, growing out of respect, isn't fragile at all. Word leaked, as it always does. Aurora returned with lemon bars and a raised eyebrow. "People are saying you weren't as poor as you looked," she said. "People are often right and wrong at the same time," I replied. I told her everything: the envelope, the properties, the eviction, the truck returned, the ocean air reclaiming the beach house. She called me brilliant and terrible. I accepted both. "Did it hurt to let her suffer?" she asked. "Every day," I said. "But comfort isn't always medicine. Don't confuse teaching with punishment," she warned gently. "Check the label on the bottle. I promise to keep reading it." Mrs. Johnson sent Angela home with a story about her own daughter and a recipe for lemon squares that actually set. She asked if I was the daughter of that rich lady on the north side. Angela said, almost laughing. I told her yes, that you could buy me a new life if you wanted. She asked why I was still working. I said because I need to prove to myself that I can stand on my own 2 feet. She said, "That's the difference between being rich and acting rich." Angela's cheeks colored the way they used to when she was caught in a lie. Except there was no lie here, only a truth she was practicing like scales on a piano. Spring came, then the kind of summer that smells like ripe peaches and fresh paint. 6 months after Mr. Peterson's reveal, Angela got into a master's program. "I'm paying for it with my savings," she said, holding the acceptance like a passport. "We could cover it," I reminded her. She smiled. "Part of who I am now is doing what I can with what I earn." I established a foundation in Robert's name to help women navigating abandonment and financial manipulation. Angela helped interview staff. One evening, she proposed turning the beach house into a temporary shelter, a sanctuary where women could rest, learn the basics of money, and plan the next version of their lives. "The best sanctuaries are the ones we share," I told her. We fixed the porch, scrubbed the cupboards, and hung a framed photograph of Robert, looking into the camera like he always knew what we would do. A letter came from France, with Edward's handwriting like nostalgia, trying to unlock a door. Angela read it, folded it gently, and placed it in the trash. "He says he's sorry," she said. "He is sorry he got caught," I said, and softened. "Forgiveness isn't about proximity. You can forgive and never be in the same room again." "I don't even need forgiveness to be part of this," she replied. That Angela is gone. Women arrived at the shelter in waves, each carrying a story sharp enough to cut glass. They slept under quilts my mother pieced, drank coffee on the porch Robert built, and sat with Angela at the kitchen table to learn how to read a lease, refuse a predatory deal, call a bank, and ask the right questions. I watched her translate her shame into a dialect that made other women stronger. She handled intake interviews with patience. She made budget worksheets with colored pencils. She walked one woman to court and sat quietly while the judge spoke. Her hands folded in her lap, but her back straight. Sometimes, late after dishes were done and the shelter was quiet, we sat on the porch and told each other the truth all over again. "Do you know the worst part?" she asked one night. "When I sold the beach house, I didn't feel anything." "It wasn't the house that hurt you," I said. "It was what you believed when you sold it. You thought we were things that could be traded." She nodded. Now when I walk through it, I hear Dad's slippers on the floorboards. I smell his coffee. I hate the girl who couldn't smell any of that. I don't, I said. I pity her. She had to lose herself to find you. We fell quiet, listening to the ocean turn itself inside out and back again. On a bright Sunday, we drove Robert's truck to the coast. Angela patted the dashboard the way you greet an old friend. The house looked exactly the same because some places choose faithfulness. We cooked there and ate at the little table with the Nick in the corner. Angela apologized specifically, not for everything all at once, which is easy to say and hard to mean, but for the exact way she'd turned our summers into currency. I forgive you, I said, and the words were ordinary and enormous. We decided to measure our days differently, not by what we had but by what we tended. When our first resident found her own apartment and signed a lease in a name that finally felt like hers, Angela cried all the way home and laughed through the tears. I think this is what rich means, she said, making room for someone else and watching them take it. Aurora, Chorus, and Friend came by with a casserole and a grin. The neighborhood is buzzing with theories, she announced. Some say you won the lottery and hid it under your mattress. I smiled. I married a man who quietly bought us futures, I said. And then I learned how to spend them. How does it feel, she asked, to be right about your plan? Like standing on a cliff with wind in my hair, I said. It makes me feel strong and a little afraid. Hold the rail, she advised, her eyes on my heart. I promised again. There are moments too sacred for paper. The morning Angela came home in her cleaning uniform and placed an envelope on the table with a month's rent for her share of expenses, money I didn't need and accepted anyway because accepting it honored her. The afternoon, she emptied half her closet into bags for the women at the shelter and sat on the floor, dazed by how light she felt. The night we heard Edward had been deported, and neither of us felt triumph or sorrow, only done. The first time I introduced Angela, not as my daughter, but as the program director of our foundation, and she flushed with a pride that owed no apology. Robert is gone and not gone. Some nights I sit on the back steps and talk to him under the turn of the stars. I tell him about the women learning to set boundaries the way he taught me to measure a board twice before cutting. I tell him about Angela's textbooks spread across the dining table and the way she mutters definitions while stirring soup. I tell him that our truck smells like him again because it is ours again, and that the house he loved now holds other people's mornings. If constellations are stories, he is the one that ends with a porch light left on. In early autumn, when the ocean put on a darker dress, Angela brought home a pie she'd baked with the women, laughter still tangled in her hair. We ate it warm and sticky. Then she said, Mom, I finally know the difference between mercy and rescue. Mercy lets a person keep their dignity. Rescue makes them dependent on your hand. I reached across the table and took her fingers. I'm sorry my mercy looked like cruelty, I said. It hurt me to watch you mop a floor I could have cleared with a phone call. It wasn't cruelty, she said. It was a mirror. I didn't like what I saw, but I needed to see it. She leaned her head on my shoulder the way she used to when thunderstorms rattled the house. Here's what I learned about love and money, and the ordinary objects people turn into battlegrounds. A house is a shelter. Yes, but it is also a ledger, where every kindness and betrayal is entered. And one day you will have to balance it. A truck is steel on wheels, but it can carry your dead back to you in the smell of worn leather and detergent. A daughter is a child you raise, and a woman you sometimes must let fall, so she reaches for the ground instead of for you. A secret is a promise you keep until telling it becomes the braver act. Richness is not the algorithm of accounts. It is the ease with which you say yes to someone who needs your presence, and the clarity with which you say no to someone who wants your permission to stay small. People still ask how I kept my face smooth and my voice gentle while my daughter cleaned offices and ate beans. The answer is that I didn't, not always. Some nights I closed my bedroom door and cried into the worn shoulder of Robert's sweater because courage is exhausting, but he had given me a manila envelope with his handwriting on it and a lifetime of mornings where, "Good morning, my love," meant, "I planned for you." and that was enough to keep my hand steady. Angela apologizes sometimes out of reflex, the way a person rubs a scar when the weather changes. I tell her, we've already paved that road past the dangerous curve, past the ditch, and now we know where it dips and where it rises. And we can drive it in the dark without fear. The last time we went to the beach house before winter, we stood at the edge of the water and counted waves like prayers. A woman from the shelter came out to the porch and waved, a toddler on her hip. Angela waved back and said, "If you'd told me that day at the clinic that I would end up here free of debts, mopping floors by choice, studying to counsel women, living with my mother like a partner, I would have laughed at you." "You did laugh at me," I said. "And I still loved you." She bumped my shoulder. "You also evicted me," she reminded, smiling. "I gave you 30 days to come home," I said, and we stood there laughing against the steady sound of the sea. Stories prefer tidy endings. Life prefers garden beds never finished, always needing water and the pulling of weeds. Angela still works some nights at the center, even though her pay from the city and the foundation is enough. She likes the way labor makes her sleep. I still drive the truck to the market on Sundays and buy too much fruit. Aurora still arrives unannounced with spice cake and opinions. Mr. Peterson sends tidy emails that feel like the opposite of miracles, which is to say, they're the miracles you can file. And Robert still tells me things in the way the house creaks and the wind does its work. And sometimes, just sometimes, when I pour coffee, I hear the echo of his voice. "Good morning, my love." And I answer out loud, "If you are a daughter, call your mother. If you are a mother, teach your daughter the price tag on everything and the value of what cannot be bought. If you are someone in a waiting room with a phone shaking in your hand and a voice on the other end cutting your life into pieces, remember this. What people take from you tells you who they are. What you do next tells you who you are. Let your mercy be fierce. Let your boundaries be kind. Let your love be a long game." Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story moved you or made you think of someone you love, please like the video, share it with a friend who needs it. Subscribe for more true-to-life stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what part stayed with you most. Your support helps keep these stories coming, and I read every word.